Hey everybody, I'm Byrne, aka The Terrible Australian at supermastery.com. Welcome to my video review of the latest film in the X-Men franchise, X-Men Apocalypse. So let's get right into it. Now, I should say right off the bat, I am a huge X-Men fan. I was kind of introduced to them through the 90s cartoon series back when I was a kid. That's when I sort of had my first exposure to it, and then from there I sort of went on to read the comics and all that. But even though when I sort of got to being older in my teen years, I kind of sort of grew out of comics, but I always had a lot of affection for the X-Men because they were always, I just found that that series of comics and those characters just really engaging to me as a reader, or even when I was watching the animated series as a viewer as well. So mainly because I just love those characters, that world, and mainly the themes and the ideas that that series sort of delved into, in particular with bigotry, discrimination, intolerance. And even as a young kid, I sort of picked up on that really early, and I just found it really engaging. And as I sort of got older, when the film started getting made, first of all, I'm a big fan of this film series. I know sometimes they're not 100% sort of faithful to the comics themselves, but to be honest, that doesn't really bother me at all, as long as the films themselves are still as engaging and sort of captured sort of the spirit of the comics. And and I think for most part the entire franchise has done that so far, and I pretty much have either really enjoyed most of the films or absolutely loved them. Except for X-Men Origins Wolverine, which I agree with everyone else is a piece of crap. And I actually did like that one when it first came out, but the more times I see it, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and it's just an absolutely awful film now, but I digress. But now we're on to the latest film in the franchise. I believe this is the 9th one, which is, of course, X-Men Apocalypse, which is the third film in the prequel series following X-Men First Class and X-Men Days of Future Past, and it's the 4th one that's directed by Bryan Singer. So, what did I think of the film? Overall, I will say, I think of the prequel series and of the ones that Bryan Singer has directed, I think this is the weakest one. But that being said, though, I still very much enjoyed it, and I'll go into why I feel like it's the weakest one. Mainly because after Days of Future Past, which I think is probably one of the most ambitious entries in the series, mainly because you had 2 parallel sort of timelines, and there's time travel, and there was a lot of emotional and thematic weight to it that just made it feel much sort of grander compared to all the other entries up in the series up to that point. So with Apocalypse, though, it kind of feels like a step down, in a way, because it's not quite as ambitious as that. In some ways it is, but not quite as Days of Future Past. And mainly because this goes back to the the cliche kind of comic book superhero kind of plot, is basically the team, the X-Men, have to stop a bad guy from destroying the world. And that's pretty much the basic premise of this one. And in that sort of front, on plot-wise, I just found it kind of the least interesting of all the entries that I've seen so far in the least interesting sort of plot to the series so far. And it's not to say that it's a bad film. Like I said, it's a really enjoyable. There's a lot of great moments here and there, sort of individual scenes and subplots and all that I thought were really well done. And also there's some great action set pieces, and pretty much, as you would expect, the cast are all terrific. Like all the returning casts, like James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hoult, Rose Byrne, all give solid work once again in their performances. With their performances. And also sort of the new cast as well. You got Ty Sheridan, Sophie Turner, Kodi Smit-McPhee, Alexandra Shipp, Olivia Munn, who are the newer sort of actors into the series, playing some of them playing the younger versions of characters that we have seen before in other entries in the series, like Cyclops and Jean Grey and Nightcrawler and so on and so forth. And others, of course, brand new to the series, like Olivia Munn's character Psylocke. So we're finally introduced to some of sort of a mixture of character, so we got younger actors playing these roles, and I think the younger cast who were sort of did a really good job as well, particularly sort of Ty Sheridan, who I feel like has finally sort of his sort of take on Cyclops. For a long time, I always felt like Cyclops was kind of the most underused character in the entire X-Men franchise, and I felt like he was never sort of given his due as a character, and I've always been a big fan of that character, but I feel like Ty Sheridan did such a really good job with his performance here, and really sort of captured sort of that spirit of the character, as well as sort of the leadership of who the character is. And also in terms like the actions, like I said, the action set pieces are really well done. There's some really good, like I said, and some really cool individual sequences, particularly sort of Michael Fassbender's subplot as Magneto, which I thought was pretty well done. And also, of course, Quicksilver, who once again played by Evan Peters, who played him, who pretty much stole the show in Days of Future Past, pretty much steals the show once again with his role in this film. And it's cool that he's actually given more to do in this one. And of course, his big main action set piece is fantastic. In terms of negatives, like I said, the plot's kind of your standard kind of superheroes band together to stop a bad guy trying to destroy the world kind of subplot. So in that regard, it's kind of lessens the film to me, especially kind of like I said before, after the ambitious Days of Future Past, it feels very slight in comparison. Like if this came out after First Class, it probably, I would say, wouldn't bother me at all. But after Days of Future Past, it just doesn't feel as ambitious. And of course, Oscar Isaac, who plays the role of Apocalypse, and Apocalypse was always one of those characters who I always been a big fan of, mainly because he's like one of the ultra bad guys in comic book films. And I think Oscar, in this film version of the character, I think Oscar Isaac does the best with what he's given, but I feel like I think the script and doesn't really sort of give him not much to do and as this character, and mainly because I don't feel like the film even capitalized the sort of the Bryan Singer take on this character doesn't really sort of capitalize on how much of a fantastic villain Apocalypse is, and he kind of just feels like your standard stock villain that we've seen in other comic book films before, and I know a lot of people sort of criticize Oscar Isaac's performance mainly because of he's under heavy makeup and his voice is sort of very digitalized and whatnot. That didn't really bother me, but I just feel like this take on Apocalypse was just kind of disappointing to me, because especially since I think he's a really great villain, and I just feel like the film kind of failed in that front for giving us a truly great villain in the X-Men series. And of course, like, there's a subplot in the film that involves a very well-known X-Men and very beloved X-Men character, that while it's a really cool sequence, but at the same time I feel like it's very tacked on. Like, you could easily have removed it and it would not have, wouldn't have ruined the flow of the film at all, and it just feels like a bit of a detour just to see what this character has been up to. But like I said, it's a cool sequence, but it feels unnecessary and could easily have been taken out. So overall, X-Men Apocalypse, it's a really enjoyable film. I really, really liked it a lot. But I would definitely say it's one of the weaker entries in the X-Men franchise. But that's not to say, like I said, it's still a fun film. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing it again. But yeah, in terms of sort of plot and script and whatnot, and the way that, and also the way that how they approach the villain, it's is pretty weak. And also the visual look of the film as well. I wasn't really much of a fan of it, because sometimes that sort of digital photography kind of made it feel a little cheap looking at times as well. And of course, one of the biggest complaints about the series, especially over the last couple of entries, being continuity errors, but particularly how can the character of Angel be in this film when he was, especially when it's set in the 80s, and he's in X-Men The Last Stand as well, and which is set in the present, and pretty much being the same age. And of course, how can this film be sort of set 20 years after First Class, but all of the major stars like Fassbender and McAvoy and Lawrence and all that look just as young in this entry than they did in that film. So, but at the moment, like, that is sort of the continuity stuff that in some ways bothers me, but at this point now, I think, yeah, pretty much in regards to the continuity of the series, that whole thing is just completely out the window now. So I'm not really bothered about it as much now as I used to. So I for now, I'm just enjoying the ride pretty much when it comes to this series. So, so overall, my rating for X-Men Apocalypse is 3.5. So yep, that's the end of my video review. Forgive me for this being a bit longer than usual, but mainly because I had a lot to say about this one. So, but I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys all later. See you, everyone. Bye.